This brings us to one of my favorite historical topics, of which you are a recent expert, Project Venona.
Yes, well, I've done a podcast with the historian of the National Security Agency, who is a terrific guy and very, very knowledgeable. So we go over the story of Project Venona, which is a story about how the Soviets were...
For you kids out there, the Soviet Union was the Russian Empire before the end of the Cold War.
Oh my goodness! I feel like Steve Martin and Martin Short in Only Murders in the Building when they refer to the young lady and they're like, "Oh, should I call her?" No, I don't think they like that. The young
Right.
people. So so the Soviets were actually using relatively insecure transmission channels for a lot of their traffic, and they were using these one-time pads to encrypt the traffic. And a one-time pad, if it's done right, is unbreakable, not just as a matter of sort of math and encryption, but sort of as a matter of information science, because it is introducing as much random information into the overall message as is regular information in the message. And so it's really, 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 really secure.
Well, let me just unpack that a little bit, because I back many decades ago when I started as a baby spy, we actually got some training on the traditional one-time pad, which is exactly what it sounds like. The Soviets would send their sleeper agents into the United States, and somewhere secreted, in a shoe heel, in a secret compartment in their closet, there was literally a pad of paper that would have what we would now think of as Post-it note sheets that you would tear off, and each one would represent a specific date. And so if you were communicating with Moscow on March 3rd, you make sure that you're using the page from March 3rd, so are your handlers back home. And as long as you never repeat the page, unbreakable, which brings us to the wrinkle in our
So that's
story.
the thing. And it's actually, it's apropos of the earlier discussion we had about some of the net assessments you could do and the pros and cons of authoritarian as opposed to, free regimes. So it turns out, those of you at home who haven't got to the punchline yet, is a one-time pad is very, very effective unless it is used 2 times. If it's used more than once, it's not as good. Don't do that at home or anywhere else, folks. And so what happened was, I think it was in the Stalinist era, and there was some guy at a factory responsible for making one-time pads, and he was not making his quota, and I think he thought he'd end up in Siberia or up against a wall, shot to death or something like that. So he started reusing one-time pads. Not a best practice in cybersecurity or information security. And that is what was their undoing. The government, the U.S. Army, I think military-based folks, had stored a lot of these things on papers and in file cabinets, and then they started going after them years later as part of a training exercise.
Well, wait, hold on.
Okay.
I think one of the best parts of the story is that we stole these one-time pad encrypted documents during and shortly after World War II, and our cryptographers looked at them and said, "Oh, these are one-time pad; they can't be broken." Then they put them in a file cabinet.
They stuck them in a drawer. And then later, years later, they went after them as part of a training exercise, and some very smart people were able to decipher a number of them because they were not in fact one-time pads. They were 2 or more time pads, and that's not what you're supposed to do. So the concern today, and by the way, if you want to hear the whole story from a really smart historian, Dave Hatch at NSA, please, go to the Lawfare podcast.
And a moderately capable interviewer.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that.
It's on the Lawfare podcast.
It certainly is. And so I commend it to you.
And let me just say, too, for those of you who think we're just blathering on about one-time pads and it has no relevance to you, well, first of all, we are blathering on.
We are blathering on, of course.
However, you may not have realized this yet, and you probably have. You use one-time pads all the time. When you try to log into your bank or a credit card or Ticketmaster, and they send you on your phone a 6 or 8 digit code, and you type it into the phone, you're using a one-time pad.
Yep. And it's a very, very strong, really the gold standard in some ways for encryption. But the lesson, I think, and the reason to be concerned in some ways for companies today is, I think one has to assume that certain capable geopolitical adversaries and others are hoarding information, which today is in fact unbreakable and encrypted in a way that can't be broken, but maybe 10 years from now, 5 years from now, I don't know, could be. And if you know anything about classification of information in the U.S. government, some of this stuff has 25-year classification on it, or even sometimes longer. And that's because experts, at least in theory, have assessed that any revelation of the information in that time period could be damaging or exceptionally damaging to U.S. national security. So the reason they're hoarding is that they're hoping 5 years, 10 years, whatever, they'll be able to apply new procedures to it and break it. That would be quite bad. Now, I will say, to just mute the alarm a little bit, I have seen public statements from NSA officials, I have every reason to believe these, that sort of U.S. government type 1 encryption, the most sensitive military encryption, is secure, has been for a while, and will remain so. So, they're not complete idiots. But the basic point is, apart from whatever you're worried about today, you need to be a little bit worried also about tomorrow. So the time to shore up your defenses is probably now, if it wasn't yesterday.
Yeah, so anything you can do, by all means, for sure, you need to use the encryption that's available to you, but also to surround and augment that capability with other protections, not just the administrative, technical, physical security measures, training your employees, making sure that the keys to your encryption are handled in a secure way. But also there's a lot of emerging technologies that allow you to some extent, future-proof your information against these future quantum or other decryption threats. The most important thing, though, I think, and a key takeaway, is that you're aware that this is a threat and start paying attention to what the government's doing, to what the National Institute of Standards and Technology standards development process is, and to these emerging technologies that may be able to give you what I like to call one-time pad adjacent capabilities. So even if it's not true one-time pad, it is using much larger random numbers. It is turning over the numbers much more frequently. It's, part of this is, I always analogize this for my clients to something you and I remember, but maybe not everyone will. So there used to be this device called the club. And the club was literally like a metal pole with a curve in it and another metal pole and a padlock. The idea is you take this thing, you put it on the steering wheel of your car, you lock the padlock, you take the key, someone breaks into your car, they can maybe jerry-rig the ignition, but they can't steer the car, so they won't steal it.
Yeah.
But a professional thief with plenty of time and a diamond saw will be able to get through the club. That's not the point. The point is the thief looks into your car windshield, sees the club, and moves on to the next guy.
Yeah, so, that's the old story about the two campers and the bear, right? You don't have to be faster than the bear, but you do have to be faster than the other camper. I
think cut their Achilles tendon.
There we go. That's the former CIA officer talking. I believe that would be a violation of many laws and rules.